Hi, this is Natu, a guy who's way too old and way too long involved in this game, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
The Norwegian player elemeNt was inducted into the Hall of Fame late last year, the ESL Hall of Fame. He's someone who I've done a reflections with towards the end of 2016. You can go and listen to him looking back on, giving his opinion on pretty much his whole career. He's one of the greatest players in Counter-Strike history, in esports history. If you want to talk all versions of Counter-Strike, this might be someone you'd end up seeing in your top 10 players of all time. He's one of the most decorated players in history, which tends to go hand in hand. He won 3 majors. He played in 6 major finals. And this is all in an era, by the way, where one of the majors, the World Cyber Games, kind of the Olympics, because it had nationality restrictions, meant that actually elemeNt didn't get many chances at winning that major because typically his country either didn't have good qualifiers and so he rarely ever attempted to qualify or did qualify. One of the few times he did go with a team from Norway, which was a mixed team because typically the best Norwegian players played in the best Swedish teams. He actually had one crack at it where he almost came in a medal position in 2008, but that was actually after he basically retired. So when you consider WCG was somewhat off table, it was incredible the amount of majors he won and the amount of finals he played in. As a result, he is actually considered, this is what a great player he was, an underachiever. Because if you listen to the story of what happened in his career, this guy might have won 5, 6 majors. He might have been in 12, 15 major finals if he'd have taken different career choices and been a little bit less impulsive. But then again, perhaps he wouldn't have been as great a player and had this specialist skill set if he had been, because he is someone who had very special talent. But when I talk about talent, I'm not just talking about raw mechanical aim. I'm not talking about that type of natural gift, but he does share something with a lot of the very skilled players in history who've had flaws in their character, like Shox and KennyS, incredibly mechanically skilled players. But as a result, because the game comes to them so easily, they have times where they're not as motivated, where they chill out, where they take time off. It wasn't that elemeNt let his individual game fall away, but it's that his skill set was like an uncanny understanding of what would happen in a game, where to be. And so the way he would abuse that is he would just change teams and think, I can get any team back to the top. I can do it with any opponent. I just want to find a scenario that's fun for me. And so he ended up bizarrely changing team a lot, even when his team was very successful. So first of all, he is someone I consider a prodigy. I don't throw that term around lightly. If I had to pick people out in CS history, I don't even know if there'd be 10 people who truly should be considered a prodigy. And 1.6 for the overall game franchise lasted 12 years. I don't think we would even get to 5 or 6 prodigies. That's how rare it is. But he is someone because he was exceptionally good at a very young age and just immediately. There was no ramp up time. There was no going to big tournaments and failing and not doing so well. He was good. He got into good teams. He was at a very high level. He was already at the championship level basically immediately. I mean, this is a guy who beat number 2, number 3, number 4 type ranked teams in the world at age 15. As in a much worse team than just a Norwegian mixed team who's beating the game online as the Nordic divisions of the world. This is a guy who 1 month into being 16 years old had played in a major final, CPL Summer 2002, and his team was in position to potentially win that final. By the time he turned 17, he'd played in 2 major finals, both times coming runners-up and being considered arguably the best player on his team. At age 17, he became the leader / in-game leader of the SK Gaming Sweden team, which despite being a Swedish team, had him, a Norwegian player in it, and was at that point in time the most dominant team in history. Incredible run they went on. At age 18, he was over in NOA, where he was able to bring an international squad with 3 Norwegians, 2 North American players to win a major of their own, winning CPL Winter at the end of 2004. When we got to age 19, he was playing in teams like 4 Kings, and then was in later in MIBR, eventually in Mouse Sports. At age 20, he was playing with a Norwegian team. I missed out the Eolithic part there because we'll get to that. He was playing in a mainly Norwegian team when they had a chance to again have a good team. They managed to make a major final. He basically retired for the first time around the age of 21, but we're talking about after the guy had obviously played over 5 or 6 years at a top pro level. And then he officially retired for good in 2008 after a brief comeback, and he just said, right, I'm 100% done now. Now, as I alluded to, not only was he a prodigy, you hear how young he is. I mean, remember, he's literally leaving his most dominant team when he's already won a number of majors and been in many major finals at age, like by the time he's 18. That's how crazy this guy's career was. So one of the weirdest things was this trend of leaving teams for, in theory, weaker teams that you're joining because he wanted a challenge. So he got into Game Online, this top Swedish team that had been in top placings at a number of majors. He takes them to the CPL final. They almost win against SK, and he goes right and leaves immediately and goes and makes a Norwegian team with a bunch of his friends. Eolithic, they become very good, arguably one of the best European teams. He gets kicked at this point in time over some dispute with Executor, ends up in Game Online again, but he takes another Game Online lineup, this one an even more crazy one, to a final. He places ahead of the Eolithic team that kicked him out. So what does he do? Goes straight back to Eolithic, make a super team with Eolithic. Then Eolithic's beating SK Gaming, the Swedish team, in most times they meet them. So he goes and leaves Eolithic, joins SK Gaming, makes them the #1 team. They become the most dominant team in history, unbeatable. The team they beat in their last major final with him is NOA. He goes and joins NOA, the team that they've just beaten. Initially has some problems, but eventually gets them to the top. They manage to win a major. Then he goes off. He goes and joins MIBR briefly, who's a much worse team than NOA. Then after that, doesn't really work out. He goes and joins Four Kings, a team that's also a bit lower down. Then he goes and joins Mouse Sports, who at this point in time is not really that great in terms of their lineup. They've fallen off the top a lot. And eventually he goes and plays in the Norwegian team in MYM. So the interesting thing was, as a skill set, he wasn't actually that sick individually. Like, of all the players who could make a top 10 list of all time, he might be the worst individually. Now, he wasn't a terrible player. He had okay skills, but he wasn't anywhere close to an aim star. He wasn't a guy who was going to drop monster frags in terms of being mechanically on, but he was a player who could be very, very good in the game because of his incredible game sense. Absolutely one of the most incredible natural aptitudes for the game, where his opponent will be, where he should be. As a result, his ability to read the game and help teammates with calls, or even play as an in-game leader, was massively amplified. This is why he could be a great in-game leader. I wouldn't say one of the greatest, because he was actually at his best as a secondary caller, playing with Executor, who was more of an X's and O's tactical type in-game leader, and therefore could do that aspect and then get the benefit of elemeNt reading the game. That's why when they were together in Eolithic and then end away, some of the most powerful lineups he was a part of. But he was also a great in-game leader in SK, even though, as I said, he was a 17-year-old kid leading, like, adult men like Potty, who might have been 25 and had been the greatest player in history at that point in time. So because of his uncanny ability to understand the game and think about the game, he was able to gather the respect of much, much more decorated and legendary players than himself. Interestingly, like I said, he did end up playing most of his career outside of Norway. They didn't have such a great scene. They didn't have a lot of organisations. There weren't a lot of tournaments there. And it showed how good he was that elite-level Swedish teams were willing to bring him in. Now, obviously, being Norwegian, yeah, he can speak Swedish, he can understand Swedish. The language aspect wasn't a problem. It's just that they had so much talent in Sweden. Remember, his era when he joined Swedish teams was when Sweden was like Korea is to games like League of Legends and StarCraft. They were the dominant region par excellence, with no exceptions made. They'd produced most of the greatest players in history and greatest champions in history. The idea that you get into one of these things by not being Swedish shows how valuable they are. That's why people like him and Executor, most notably, even though you also had people like Dark to a lesser degree, showed that they were gods, because even the Swedes acknowledged that and got these guys in their teams. So let's go through some of his career and you'll see what a legendary career this guy has, because obviously he has such a long and decorated career. I'm not going to go into all the details, but just as I hit the high points, you'll see what a nuts career he had. So as I said, he got into Game Online, this big level Swedish team, by beating them. He was in the Meredia team, featuring, not in this particular tournament, BSL and Nikon and Damien, players that you'll know if you know the Norwegian scene back then. BSL actually wasn't in the active lineup at the time. And he's able to come to this land, GameSphere in Norway, and this little team who's unknown manages to upset all these huge names who've all just been to the last major in America and placed top 4 and won massive prize money. He's able to upset all of them and win this tournament. And as a result of doing so, gets picked up by Game Online for the summer's tournaments and then following months. After a bad LAN arena, where it didn't really go that great for anyone generally, it was a pretty shit tournament, they go to CPL Summer, the next major, and they managed to make it to the final. In fact, they not only managed to make it to the final, but they even win a map in the final of SK, of Dark and Executor, fellow Norwegians, but also Porty and Heater and Executor as well. Some of the greatest winners in history. So he managed to win second place in his first big major. By the end of the year, well, there's a little slot between where he goes, after that, he goes and joins a team called Eolithic, which is basically people from his Meredia team that he then makes a top Norwegian team with. And they managed to win the big CPL Europe, CPL Oslo. Admittedly, SK wasn't there, but then SK was taking a hiatus at the time because they weren't going to play the World Cyber Games because they had 2 Norwegian players. And what happens is those 2 Norwegian players actually end up getting kicked out of SK. And so Executor, obviously, he's the most decorated player in history from Norway, and so Elithig wants Executor. But the problem is, by having Executor, he wants to bring Dark, and also a very good player from SK, with him as a package deal, and they want elemeNt kicked out, because Executor and elemeNt always had a very contentious relationship. They're just different people. It's like the Kobe and Shaq example. Like, elemeNt's the fun-loving guy who rests on his natural talent to some degree, and it just comes easily to him, and I just want to play and have fun. Executor's the like overly serious Kobe guy who's practicing everything light and day to live and die by these wins and come in second place at the end of the world. You should be improving all the time. So obviously they don't get along for fairly obvious reasons. And one's the established great player, one's the up-and-coming great player. So he gets kicked out of Elithig, and he goes and he joins Game Online again. And this time they make a Scandinavian/Nordic super team, because they have Missa from Finland, they have Vicon from Denmark, they have elemeNt from Norway, they have, who else was it? Hib and OllieJ from Sweden, the brothers. So they represent all the Nordic countries, except fucking Iceland or whatever. They managed to come second place at this CPL, despite the fact they're a team that hasn't played tournaments before with this particular lineup. They've got a very high-powered lineup. It was like a super team at the time of the Nordic region. And actually, Elithig had been considered the number one team, the team he'd been kicked out of going into that tournament. But they bomb out and they finished like 8th place with a very disappointing performance. And Game Online managed to come second place. Again, they were able to potentially win the tournament, but they didn't manage to do so. They even beat his old teammate, his old rivals in SK. And so after this, he leaves again to go back to Elithig, because Elithig's seen the light of their ways and they decide to make the Norwegian super team. So that means, yes, Dark and Executor, but elemeNt as well. And when you combine them all together, they become very dangerous. Famously, they beat SK in 6 out of 7 games, including online games. So they were beating up Heat and Potty, the greatest winners in history to that point in time. They weren't able to win at the big tournament they went to, which was Click Arena. They beat SK, but they lost to Westerlund's Team 9/eSports United squad. So one of the guys who was playing in the eSports United team, he'd beaten in Game Online. So eventually, because Elithig can't get good sponsorship, they break up because elemeNt leaves. And he leaves to go to a Swedish team. This time he accepts an offer to join Heaton and Potty. He goes and plays in SK Sweden. Their first tournament, when he hasn't had much time to play, was where they were running a full 6-man rotation with Brunk as well, the Swedish AWPer. And they only finished top 4 at ESWC because they got upset by Zex on that infamous train game, which has allowed Zex with Shagwa and Sunman to go to the final. But after that, nothing can stop this SK team. They become gods. They win every tournament and they're not even dropping a single map ever. They win CPL Summer, the big major, a few weeks after ESWC. They win both seasons of the Swedish eSport League that he's playing in with them. Without him, because he obviously couldn't play in the World Cyber Games, that had been all Swedish lineups. They used Spawn at the time as a stand-in. They won that undefeated. They won CPL Copenhagen, the big European CPL. He didn't play in that because of like homework or school or something, but I think he gave them tactics. They win that tournament undefeated. They go to CPL Winter, the next major. They win that undefeated, beating NOA. This time, obviously, he's the in-game leader. The dominance was insane. The prize money record was broken. They lost something like 1 map out of 43 played from CPL Summer onwards. Unbelievable level of dominance. And he was the guy where this wasn't like a super tactical team. It was more of like a mid-round type team where he's calling stuff on the fly. He's calling stuff between rounds. And he's leading, yes, some of the best players in the world and some of the greatest in history in Heat and Potty, obviously, and Spawn, to the most success they've ever had. Unbelievable success. So what do you do when you're at the peak of your powers, when no one's been able to dethrone you, no one can stop you? Well, if you're elemeNt, because like a Shocks, you live a charmed life and you can go and do whatever you want, you leave that team for the rival that you've just met, NOA. You go and join your former teammates, Nikon and Knoxville, and replace BSL, your old in-game lead from a long time ago, and you join NOA. First ever time that someone's contract had been bought and they'd have been officially signed. This was in 2004. When he initially joins NOA, though, it actually goes badly because the 2 big majors of the summer, ESWC and CPL, you want to do well at those 2. Those are considered 2 of the big ones to win. ESWC, they don't even make the playoffs. They play particularly badly. In between then and CPL, they have a tournament in North America called Everland. I think it was on the west coast of America. And they managed to come and win this tournament. Slightly dodgy circumstances, but there's some good teams there, North Americans particularly. So they show, hey, we still got a lot of talent. We won the SWC North American qualifier. So they go to CPL hoping that they're going to be in good form, and they bomb that. I think they finished like 9th to 12th or something, or maybe even worse. And this is the one where famously they got upset by a mixed team of like invite level players who weren't even that good on Inferno. It was like a 16, well, maybe it would have been 13-11 back then. I can't remember who we had 12 at the time. I think we still did. Then later on in the year, there's a couple of lands in Europe, Oslo land and Norelva, and what they do is they try out different players at these lands. So they take Al, his Swedish friend, formerly of SK, as a stand-in for Oslo land, and they win that. They go to Norelva, and they don't win. I think they finish like top 4, but they bring Executor as a stand-in. I think maybe he also stood in the other land. No, perhaps not, I don't think. And eventually they decide to replace Knoxville with Executor, and that means they get a proper in-game leader, but elemeNt can also do a sort of secondary calling. And what do you know? At the tournament, they had to win, otherwise they would have broken up, or at least that's what Shagwar told me. They were able to win CPL Winter. Now, admittedly, SK wasn't there, who was one of the better teams, but there were some very good teams there still. Also, crucially, for the first time in history, a team won a CPL major from the lower bracket because they had lost the upper bracket match and they win both lower bracket games on Inferno to win this major with NOA. And as you see, at this point in elemeNt's career, he can waltz around from team to team, and the only common thread is he keeps going to the top, going to the major finals, and the teams he's on often don't do as well without him, and he takes them to his best while he's there. So you can already see what a special player he is. Now, before he leaves NOA, they go to Korea to play the first WEG season. Pretty big tournament, but not a major. They win this. Not that great in terms of competition. A lot of the top teams weren't there. After that, they just break apart. They can't keep a team together with all these big personalities. He goes off. He initially plays in Made in Brazil, even though it's a Brazilian team speaking Portuguese, and he doesn't speak Portuguese. Famously, there's an incident where on Dust 2, a player's coming in the window, or someone's coming in the door, I think, and someone says porta, which means like either window or door, I don't know. I assume fucking door, and then he thinks it's the window, and he gets shot in the back by a miscomm. Then after that, famously, he didn't get on a flight to go boot camp in Brazil. Instead went to the E3 All-Star game or something fucking ridiculous like that. So as a result, MIBR kicked him out. Initially, he went and played with his mates in Four Kings because he was a bit of a partier, and some of the party guys were in Four Kings. He went to WEG with them, Season 2. So while his old team in a way bombs out and does terribly, quick as a stand-in, he comes third place actually with Four Kings. Yeah, admittedly a bit of an underpowered field, but again shows that he can just do anything he wants to. Everything works when you're elemeNt. Even with the MIBR team, he came top 6 at a CPL in Spain, even despite not being able to fucking communicate with his teammates. Unfortunately, though, Four Kings bomb SWC, and that was never meant to be a permanent stop for him. He was kind of taking a semi-sabbatical, just playing around for fun. So at the last major of the year, CPL Winter 2005, he plays with some of his North American friends from United 5. He was staying over with, I think, his ex-teammate Method, maybe hanging out with him in LA, just plays this tournament with them. They don't do particularly well, but whatever, he's just fucking around. So bizarrely, his next stop's the weirdest one ever, because he then goes and joins Mouse Sports, agrees to move to Germany, play in EPL, etc., the, ESL Pro League over there, and actually, or Pro Series, I think it was called. And bizarrely, even though he doesn't speak German, they tell him, you're going to have to learn German, And he's like, yeah, sure, because he's a very intelligent guy, but he doesn't put in much time learning German. And as a result, the team's fairly lackluster. Their best result was they won the Euro Cup, which got them to, which they did on LAN, in terms of beating, I think, SOA, Spirit of Amiga in the final. Not those great teams. Not that many great teams played in the Euro Cup back then, which took them to the Transatlantic Showdown, where they played against Fraud's Complexity, one of the better teams in the world, and they were able to finish second there, losing to them. Later on, because the Mouse period didn't go particularly well generally, not that many big international placings, he later joined a Norwegian team to kind of wind up his career, where he was playing with very good players like Real, etc., PRB. The big performance was one of his first. He got CPL Winter. This is a guy who's been in the Brazilian CPL major finals, and he makes it again. He makes it there, and they play against Forest, Tentpole, and Carnes and DSNs. Fnatic, who themselves had never won a major or a big tournament, and actually it's the Fnatic team that wins. He has to come second place. After that, results start to drop off a little bit. One that I will mention is they finished third place at the SEC, which is the European version of the World Cyber Games. And actually that was a run where they absolutely could have gone further and gotten a better medal than bronze. After that, they bomb SWC, and basically elemeNt just leaves the active lineup. The team keeps playing without him, but they're not as great. He comes back bizarrely, we're talking about 2007 now, a year later to play in a mixed team that bizarrely manages to go to the World Cyber Games for WCG 2008. And at the World Cyber Games, they get all the way to the semi-final. And in the semi-final, they're playing NateDOhDoubleG Denmark, the #1 team in the world. Zonic Ave, Wimp, those guys' MTW team with Sunders, the star player, and they almost beat this team in a best of 3. This was an incredible one-off run performance, and they almost won. If they'd have won, they would have been guaranteed, obviously, a gold or a silver medal by making the finals. They would have stopped MTW from winning a major. This was their era, actually. Unfortunately, they lost this semi, and then they lost the bronze medal game to Eastro, who was solo, who currently is in MVP Project. It was his Korean team who won the bronze medal. So even at the end, even in a team where he's not playing actively, he's not playing as a pro anymore, some of those players are playing semi-pro, they can go as a mixed team, and he's still having relevant results in a big major. So one of the most incredible players in the history of Counter-Strike. He's someone I will write a feature-length article about one day, because just the story and the context to how brilliant the guy was incredible. In some ways, I would compare him to like John Jones, because John Jones already could be the best UFC fighter of all time, the best mixed martial artist, and he won the championship many times, and he has a great decorated career. But what more could he have been if he'd have had a Kobe Bryant, if he'd have had like a GSP mentality where you just work as hard as you can and try to be the best you could be? In the same way, what more elemeNt could have been? What greater things he might have accomplished? But hey, maybe the story wouldn't have been as cool, right? This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, James Harding, Kyla Harris, Travis Greb, Daniel Yordanov, Tristan Jones, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for upcoming content of mine? Perhaps you'd like to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA. Do you want some teasers to see who the next guests are for my talk shows, for my interviews? Maybe you'd like to take part in a monthly esports discussion with yours truly. Well, put your money where your mouth is at the Patreon link in the description box below and join the Scrilluminati today.